Paul Keating, you have two anecdotes that explain why you feel so strongly that APEC should be first and foremost a leaders' forum, but also have strong strategic focus. Now, the first of those anecdotes relates to former Japanese Prime Minister Miyazaki. Can you elaborate?
Well, I was at dinner with him one night, and I was Treasurer then, and he was Finance Minister of Japan. He later became Prime Minister. And, you know, I've been friendly with him a long time, you know, and he said to me, Mr. Keating, he said, let me ask you this, he said, do you think the Chinese will attack us? And I said, oh, no, Mr. Salazar, I don't. He said, quizzically, but why not? And you could feel the hair on the back of your neck go up, you know, thing like that. Another event I had was on the Chinese side, one of the three people who managed China in the 90s said to me quite candidly, if the Japanese ever go to nuclear weapons, we would take them out before they started, meaning they would attack them first. Now, no good ever happens in that relationship between China and Japan. It's just simmered along in resentment and mistrust since the war.
And it had struck you that there was no dialogue between them,
yeah.
But also the Americans in that equation as well.
And there was no dialogue, Kerry, and there was no structure, there was no political architecture in the Pacific, none whatsoever. And remember, I'm talking about now 1991, when I'm Prime Minister, at the end of the Cold War 3 years earlier, you know, 2.5 years earlier. So there was an opportunity of regionalism of a kind we couldn't do while the old bipolarity of the Cold War existed. But there was no structure where a Japanese Prime Minister could sit down with a Chinese President, none, and certainly none where the strategic guarantor of Japan and South Korea, which is the US, where the US President could be involved. So the APEC leaders meeting was an idea that I had to provide some political architecture in this part of the world that wasn't, where the debate wasn't run really by the United States Navy, which is what it had ordinarily otherwise been.
So why was it so hard for you to then convince the leaders that they needed that forum?
Well, the Americans were scared stiff of it because they thought everyone would run away from them the moment they turned up. And nobody wants to make a move. China was concerned about Hong Kong and Taiwan being around. Miyazawa said to me that if I was able to get Suharto, and you know what a
So if you got Suharto, you'd get ASEAN.
I'd get ASEAN, and if I got ASEAN and Miyazawa, I'd probably get Li Peng and the Chinese, and if I got them, I would get George Herbert Bush, then later Bill Clinton, and that's the way it turned out.
Okay, then why did you fail to, having got the leaders to agree, why were you not successful in having the focus of that leaders meeting at least substantially on strategic issues?
Well, that was basically because of Bill Clinton. Without Bill Clinton, I probably wouldn't have got the leaders meeting together, but his terms were this. He said, look, I won the election in '92 on the slogan, "It's the economy stupid." He'd attacked George Herbert Bush for his adventurism in Iraq, and he didn't want to appear 1 year later to be setting up a supra-strategic body, albeit in the Pacific. So the deal we did was we would keep the focus for the moment on trade and facilitation, and we would have the first meeting in Seattle, the home of Boeing and Microsoft, because they were the two great corporations. So the view would be, here we are in Seattle, looking west across the Pacific to Asia for these two great corporations. So, and frankly, you know, from the point of view of an Australian Prime Minister and Australian foreign policy, you know, I was grateful to get it up, even if the terms were that we were not going to immediately get into the strategic matters.
So what may have been a compelling case then for strategic matters isn't necessarily a compelling case now. The Chinese and the Japanese and Americans are at least engaging in that, in some dialogue through APEC.
Yeah.
Do you believe, really, that the tensions between China and Japan are as potentially explosive today as they were back when you had those conversations with Miyazaki and the Chinese?
They're kind of worse.
Miyazawa and the Chinese.
Yeah, they're worse. They're worse. Worse than then. Because China, I mean, in those days, China was on the ropes trying to come out of Tiananmen Square, you know. And Japan was still top of the pops in economic growth. It hadn't gone through the big 90s recession, you know. Now it's reversed, you know. China is now the second or third largest economy in the world. It's the same size as Japan. Japan grows at 1%. China grows at 11%. China's ageing demographic means the country's shrinking. China's got a much younger demographic. And the Japanese very much resent the rising power of China. And the Chinese resent the fact that the Japanese are still trying to call the war history like some sort of self-defence thing. So, you know, the game remains nasty. And anyone in the Australian polity who doesn't know that knows nothing.
But why aren't the major leaders seeing this?
Because they're all...
If it's such a compelling
argument. In the end,
argument.
they're turkeys, Kerry. They won't take the big issues on, you see. To get up there and say to the Chinese, you will find a place for the Japanese in your scheme of things. And to the Japanese, you will atone for the sins of the Second World War and you will make a point of accommodation with China. You know, the Americans are in there playing the sort of the game with their mates, the Japanese, and trying to push the Chinese off to one side. And they might need the Japanese to defend the old colony, Taiwan, in the past, you know, their old colony of the past. So, but this is where leadership comes in. This is why we've now wasted 2 US presidencies on these issues. At least with Bill Clinton, the last thing I did with as Prime Minister, was get Bill Clinton and Jiang Zemin to have reciprocal visits. That better relationship between China and the US got China into the World Trade Organisation.
You did that?
Oh yeah, I was in that there. In fact, the first big meeting I had after I left the Prime Ministership was to go to Washington to deal with Sandy Christoph on Clinton's staff to get Clinton to go through with it. You know,